Good morning, everyone. Today we will solve problems using data represented in bar graphs, including part to whole and part to part comparisons and equivalence. So in today's lesson and the activity that you're going to be doing, you're going to be using skills that you've already learned as a 7th and 6th grader, learning how to write ratios, using part to whole comparisons, and then writing ratios as part to part comparisons. And when we talk about ratios, we always think about fractions. And then when it comes to fractions, we can also write those as fractions, decimals, and percents. So we'll start off with A. A is asking us, it says, the bar graph shows the results of a survey of students' favorite sport. So if you look at this bar graph here on the right, it shows you students that like, how many students like football, basketball, soccer, baseball, and tennis. A starts off with just asking for us to write a fraction, or we could think of to write a ratio of the total number of students that prefer football, right? So what fraction of the total number of students prefer football? Well, we have to look to see how many students prefer football. And if you can see here, it measures at about 100. So the fraction of students that prefer football would be 100. Out of the total number of students, in order to find the total number of students, we'd have to add up football, basketball, soccer, baseball, and tennis. So we're talking about the whole. So football's 100. Looks like basketball's around 70, somewhere around there. So 170 plus 60, that's 230. 230 plus 120 would be 350, and then 350 plus 50 would be 400. So there's 400 total students. So our fraction would be 100 over 400. So if I write that fraction in simplest terms, you could find the greatest common factor between 100 and 400, or you could just take the shortcut and you could simplify out the zeros. So we'll simplify out those zeros, and we can see that 1/4 of the students prefer football. In B, it says compare the number of students whose favorite sport is soccer to the number of students whose favorite sport is baseball. So this, in B, it's making a part-to-part comparison. It's comparing soccer to baseball. Now in A, they were making a part-to-whole comparison. They were comparing the number of students who prefer football to the total number of students. Now we're making a part-to-part comparison, soccer to baseball. So it's going to be soccer to baseball. We're going to see how many students like soccer. It says that 60 students like soccer over the number of students who like baseball, 120 students like baseball. So 60 over 120, we're going to simplify that fraction, or we're going to write it an equivalent fraction to 60 over 120. For most of us, we could see that the common denominator there, or first of all, let's simplify out the zeros like we talked about last time. So we'll simplify out those two zeros. We have 6 over 12, and we can see the greatest common factor between those two numbers, 6 and 12, is 6. So if I divide by 6, that equals 1 over 2. So C is asking us what percent of total number of students prefer either basketball or tennis. So I'm going to do the work down here. And it's asking us basketball or tennis. Oops. So we're going to have to find out how many students like basketball. Remember here, that was about 70 students who like basketball, plus the number of students who like tennis, which is 50, over the total number of students, because it asks what percent of the total number. So we're making a part-to-whole comparison. So 70 plus 50 is 120 over 400, right? Remember, we can simplify this by simplifying out some zeros or canceling them out. So now that becomes 12 over 40. And in order to convert that to a percent, we could divide 12 by 40. Top dog goes inside the house. I'm running out of space over here. I'm going to do the work using a calculator. So 12 would go into 40. 40 would go into 12. Zero 0.3 times. So 0.3. If I convert 0.3 to a percentage, we're going to multiply it by 100, or you guys know Dr. Pepper. So Dr. Pepper means we're going from decimal to percent, 1, 2 spaces to the right, which means we're going 1, 2 spaces. We're going to put a decimal there, which means 30%. So 30% of the students prefer either basketball or tennis. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase all of that. That way we have some space to do the last problem. So if you need to use it, you can go back and rewind the video. But for now, I'm just going to erase that one. Now we'll do the last problem. D, how many more students said that their favorite sport is baseball than students who said their favorite sport is basketball? So we're comparing baseball to basketball. Actually, this one is not even that deep. So let me erase that. And I'm not editing out my mistake on purpose, right? Because this is a big mistake that a lot of students will make. All it wants to know is how many more students said that their favorite sport is baseball than students who said their favorite sport is basketball. So it's a really, whenever we ask how many more, this is a very elementary school question. It's just asking us to make a comparison. So we're going to look to see how many students like baseball. We can see that there's 120. And then we're going to subtract or find out how many more than basketball. We know that basketball was 70. Remember that there. 120 minus 70 equals 50. So there are 50 more students who said their favorite sport is baseball compared to students who liked basketball. Just to wrap everything up again, remember we solved problems using data represented in bar graphs. We made part-to-part comparisons, meaning we compared basketball to baseball or football to soccer. And then we also made part-to-whole comparisons where, for instance, in number 1, we made a fraction of the number of students who preferred football compared to the total number of students. And then in number 3, in C, we also made another part-to-whole comparison by comparing the students who like basketball or tennis with the total number of students. We wrote that into a fraction and we converted that fraction to a percentage.